for joining us today. My name is Debbie Levy, and I'm a proud JNFuture donor. I'm also the Georgia Tech campus liaison, and I sit on both the Atlanta Board of Directors and Faculty Fellowship Committee. As an Israel Defense Force veteran and soon-to-be industrial engineer, Jewish National Fund's work in environmental sustainability combines my love of Israel and passion for creating a sustainable future for Israel and the world with regards to water, agriculture, and energy. JNF is at the forefront of this work, partnering with institutions here in the US as well as in Israel, which you'll hear about in a moment. It's donors like you and I who get to have an impact in this work, as well as with all of what JNF does to develop the land and people of Israel. If you haven't made your annual gift yet to Jewish National Fund, I ask you to join me in supporting this incredible work and make your gift today. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Tali Tzour and Dr. Joaquin Ruiz. Dr. Joaquin Ruiz is the Vice President of Global Environmental Futures at the University of Arizona. He is a member of the Jewish National Fund's Joint Institute for Global Food, Water, and Energy Security, a joint program with JNF, the University of Arizona, and the Aggraval Institute. He is also the director of Biosphere II, an Earth System Science research facility designed for outreach, teaching, and lifelong learning about Earth, its living systems, and its place in the universe. With more than 28 years of dedicated service, Tali Tzour has played an instrumental role in implementing KKL-JNF's vision for the land and people of Israel. As Jewish National Fund's Chief Israel Emissary, Tali fosters a close connection between the American Jewish community, the Israeli people, and the KKL-JNF operations. Tali oversees JNF task forces on water solutions and cutting-edge development of Israel's Aggraval region.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Nice to see you all here, and thank you for joining us. Great honor to be with you tonight. I would like to share my screen and to give you a short presentation. I will start with JNF a little bit, and then water, and then it is my honor to give the stage and the podium to Joaquin Ruiz, Dr. Joaquin Ruiz. I will tell you more about, the connection and how we met each other and what we're working, and he's gonna elaborate, in fact, about, what we're working together with the University of Arizona, and he's leading it. I'm sharing my screen. Okay. So I know that most of you are familiar with Jewish National Fund, and I'm not going to give you the long history of Jewish National Fund, but just, a short description for those of you that this is the first time for them to join, a JNF event, and especially, Zoom events. It's hard these days. So just for those who know zero about JNF, it's this is a picture from the first or the 5th Zionist Congress that took place in Basel, in Switzerland, where the Jewish National Fund was established 120 years ago this year. We're going to celebrate this December and January, the 120th anniversary of the organization. The organization was established as a Zionist movement or arm of the Zionist movement to cultivate the land of Israel, to purchase land in Israel, and to enable Jews from all over the world who wanted to make Aliyah and to come and reside in Israel to make it possible for them. I'm sure if I'm going to ask most of you, what do you know about JNF? The first reaction will be trees, because almost every one of us has planted or a tree in honor of someone, or a tree has been planted in his honor or her honor. But Ruiz was only an excuse to show the Ottoman Empire back then in Israel that we cultivate the land and we own the land, and that was the cheapest and the easiest way to do that. To cut a very long story short, today, JNF, Jewish National Fund, has planted 250 million trees in the land of Israel, covering about 5% of the land of Israel. All the forests in Israel were planted by Jewish National Fund. We do not have natural forests in Israel, but that makes us the largest, I would say, green environmental organization in Israel, working until this very day with the trees. But this is not just trees. It's much bigger than trees. So I'm jumping almost 120 years forward to the year of 2020, where JNF, I'm talking about JNF USA, is extremely involved in the northern side of Israel, i.e. from Haifa to the north, and the southern part of Israel, i.e. from Beersheba all the way to the south. This is about 75% of the land of Israel. And what we are doing over there, we're trying to enlarge the population, to encourage more people to live in these areas, because out of the 9 million people who live in Israel, hardly 1.5 million people live in the northern part of Israel and the southern part of Israel. This is the future of Israel. If you've been to Israel or you know the map of Israel, most of the people live in the triangle between Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa. It makes it a very, very expensive area to live in and a very high dense and very populated area. The Negev, the desert, the mountains in the Galil and the Golan, these are beautiful areas, and Jewish National Fund is working very hard to develop. And when I say working very hard, it means that if you hear about a medical center and a reservoir and a kindergarten and a gym center and infrastructure for new home sites and R&Ds and the ACAT, the Arava International Center, you're gonna hear about it, in fact, in the next time that you're gonna meet here at the JNFuture event. It's called Arava International Center for Agricultural Training that brings students from all over the world. And so on and so forth. We are trying to improve the life, to make it better for them. Everything is sustainable today because you have to think about everything and the synergy between all these factors. And JNF is, if you ask any resident in these areas, JNF is the main organization that voluntarily and out of generosity works in these areas to make them not only greener, but flourish and resided and populated with as many people as we can do. So one of the items that we are working on, or one of the fields, is water. And that's gonna lead me to the next, I would say, 7-8 minutes to speak about water globally and water in Israel. And then Dr. Joaquin Ruiz is gonna continue and tell you more about what we're doing in the Arava. For those of you who understand that water is a big issue, but do not understand why is it a big issue, I just want to give you a few facts and figures so that it will make it clear. In the 20th century, the world's population has tripled. But when the world's population has only tripled, the use of water grew by 6 times. It is expected that by 2050, the world's population will rise from 7.7 billion to 9.7 billion. And that means that the use of water will even grow more. And that means that the shortage of water will even be bigger. And that's why not only the land of Israel or the state of Israel, the entire world has to prepare itself for the water scarcity around the world today and in the future. If we're talking globally about, the average use of water, only 10% goes for domestic use. So when we're talking about, saving water in the shower or using less, water in the bathroom, that's not enough, because most of the water, as you can see, goes for agriculture. So if we really want to save water, we have to think about the agriculture and how do we use efficiently the water that we use for agriculture. Agriculture, in other words, means food. What Israel is known today for the water successes, and is the water model, a country that has succeeded to overcome its water scarcity. How did we do that? In 1948, the British mandate limited the Aliyah quota to Israel, to the land of Israel, because they said you don't have enough water. We had only 600,000 people, and they said you can bring up to 1 million people to live over here. No water in this area. Today, with 50% less rain, Israel supplies water to 12 million people, 9 million people in Israel, and more people in the Palestinian Authority and in the state of Jordan. So something that Israel did, she did it right. And what is it? First of all, first Prime Minister Ben-Gurion has announced, upon the establishing of the State of Israel, the water as a national asset. Even if you own a land or you live on a huge well of water, you cannot use it. The water belongs to the country. Everybody pays for the water. The water authority controls the water in Israel. Technology became a big deal. You heard about the desalination, we'll speak about it in a second, and recycling in Israel, and all the startup companies for the water technologies. Israel is encouraging water technology. Then we said, okay, sewage, wastewater is also water. Israel has become #1 in the world, the country that is rated #1 in the world in recycling. 85% of the sewage in Israel is recycled and used for agriculture. And I'm reminding you that agriculture consumes about 65% of the water consumption in average around the world. After Israel, which is #1 in the world, comes Spain with only 17% of its sewage recycled. And in the United States, even less than 5% of the sewage is recycled. The water that is recycled is stored in over 250 water reservoirs that the Jewish National Fund has built around Israel, in the north, in the south, in the center for the kibbutzim, the moshavim, private businesses, etc., etc. So recycling is one of the answers that Israel gave to the water scarcity. Then you heard about, technology. We mentioned technology. Let's take even the drip irrigation that was invented in Israel by a company named Netafim. It's very easy. It's just a pipe with holes, but the computer controls the amount of water, the time that the fields will be irrigated, the minerals that will be pumped into the irrigation system, and so on and so on. And everything like this makes it very smart. And I'll tell you why. If you think of Asia, for example, most of the fields in Asia are irrigated by a water flood. You flood and you lose a lot of water because of the evaporation. If you use drip irrigation, which is an Israeli technology, much more expensive, of course, but if you invest in it, you increase the yield and you save water, which is so short around the world. Desalination, very easy. Again, Israeli innovation. Just to take water from the sea, and within 30 minutes, you pump the water from the sea, you take the salt out of the water, and you have fresh water for the Israeli homes. 60% of the Israeli homes are using desalinated water. Every Israeli pays as much as it costs to produce the water, to protect, to improve the infrastructure, etc., etc. We have a quota in Israel. If I have 2 kids and a husband, we're 4 people in the family, we have a quota. We can use more than the quota that is given to us, but we will pay much more for, whatever we use above the quota. So improving and running the systems effectively is also controlled by Israel's water authority. I spoke about, the growth of the population around the world. We're talking today about Israel. The focus is Israel. Israel is expected, the population in Israel is expected to grow from 9 million people today to about 16 million by 2050. Guys, the calculation is very easy. More people, more water that we need, much more water. Remember the first slide I showed you that although the world's population tripled, the use of the water grew by 6 times. That's the same ratio and even more, because the level of life is rising and the more water that the people will use. So, like Prime Minister Ben-Gurion thought about, the future generations in 1948 and prepared the country, the young country, for the next generations in terms of technology and using water and thinking forward as to, how to use water, we are still thinking today as to how to save more water and how to produce more water for the next generations, when we will have about 16 million people. So the 3 main methods, and I'm closing in a second, Sarah, the 3 main ways of saving of thinking of water is water saving by, saving at home, saving with the agriculture, etc., etc. Wastewater reuse, which is the recycling, and desalination. We have today 5 desalination plants in Israel, and another 3 are being built as we speak. So what is the JNF doing in Israel in order to help with the water economy? With the initiatives that we have done through the years, we added about 15% of the Israel's water economy by building water reservoirs, 250 water reservoirs, rehabilitation and restoration of rivers. That helps a lot in protecting the aquifers, which are another natural source of water in Israel, reclamation, recycling, and building treatment of wastewater in the Arava, in the north, helping with water drillings, again, in the north, in the south, construction of wetlands, which is a biological way of treating the wastewater, and education of the young generation. We've been building 90 rain harvesting water systems in elementary schools to teach the young kids as to how to save water and how to treat the water and how to use it in their own backyards and in their bathrooms, as well as supporting the Stockholm Junior Water Prize. This is an international competition for innovations for kids in water for kids from all over the world. So I hope I did it in 15 minutes and I hope I didn't speak too long. Joaquin, Ruiz, the stage is yours. I'll just say 2 words in order to introduce you. I've been on the line, I think, with Joaquin in the last few months, almost every other day. I won't say every day, but every other day, because 2 years ago, Jewish National Fund, together with the University of Arizona, has established the JNF Joint Institute for Global Food, Water, and Energy Security. And I cannot even tell you the excitement, the collaboration, where we're going and what we're doing. And with no further ado, Joaquin, Ruiz, the stage is yours, and thank you for being with us today. And thank you all. Stop sharing my screen.
Okay, Tali, thank you so very much. And Debbie, congratulations for your involvement in this group and your commitment to make Israel better and the world better, really. So I really congratulate you. I'm the director of Biosphere II, and Israel and Biosphere II have, like many things around the world that are amazing, they start with almost a reckless dream. And in the case of, wait for the helicopter to go by. In the case of Biosphere II, the whole thing was built by a variety of freethinkers that wanted to copy Biosphere I, which is our world, so that they could actually understand how it operates. We now call that Earth systems, but 30 years ago, I'm not quite sure that was actually even used. And just to give you an idea of the kinds of characters that built the place, they were part of an organization. They were mostly artists, and they were part of an organization that was called the Theater of All Possibilities. And I think I urge you all to think of the world and your future with those terms. It's a theater of all possibilities, and it's exciting to see folks like you be engaged in that regard. Now, Tali is my best friend now. I greatly admire her, and she again is a dreamer, and she clearly is driven by the dream of making Israel all it can be. And some people would argue that all it can be was surpassed years ago because nobody expected it to be the innovation nation that it's become. Israel started, as Tali said, in a place that was pure desert. It is not that anymore, although 60% of it is still desert of the highest quality of the world. The Negev desert is one of the places that has the fewest amount of rain. Now, if you think about global climate change, and this organization is all about sustainability, or at least that's part of it. Sustainability is only part of what's coming with global climate change. Resiliency is going to be a big deal. Global climate change impact is going to be greater than we expected, sooner than we expected. We can just see it every day. And everybody must remember that the hammer of global climate change is water. So the places that don't have any water now are going to end up having less water. And the places that have lots of water now are going to end up having even more water. So it's the hammer. It's the thing that's going to make people's lives very difficult. But in addition to the fact that water is going to be changing in the way that we get it, the other thing that happens with water and with global climate change is that it's a social justice issue, because the places that are going to become more desertified are typically places where people are already struggling to make a living. So as Tali said, when we had a donor, a local, I'm not exactly sure how this institute began, but there was a local donor here in Tucson that gave enough money to see if we could breathe life into a concept of a collaboration between the Negev desert, the kibbutz in the Negev desert, the Arava region, and the University of Arizona, which has been ranked by all the proper ranking institutions as #1 in the world, really, in water, going all the way from engineering to law to policy. So we have the credentials to partner with the place that has shown, as Tali has pointed out, that has shown that they know how to manage water without a lot of fanfare. This business of the drip system, which every time somebody invents something, after it's been invented, we all say, jeepers, how come we didn't think about it? It's not as trivial as that when it doesn't exist, right? And it's not only a pipe with holes, the holes have to be the right size, so there's a lot of fluid mechanics involved in it, artificial intelligence, precision agriculture, all these things that people have to worry about to make the thing work, and not just the fact that you have water dripping into some plants. I've tried that on my own, and I'll tell you that I've killed about everything in my backyard. So it takes more than just a pipe with little holes. So after we met through the generosity of a donor, there was a delegation from Arava that came to the University of Arizona, and this delegation recognized that there were a lot of collaborations that could be done, because what we both do is deal with water, society, energy, and food. And as Tali said, if you want to worry about water, if you want to do something about water, you have to do something about agriculture. And energy is required to get the whole thing to work, either to desalinize water, to pump water. Energy is part of a triangle that all needs to be resolved at once. and that's a water, energy, and food triangle. After the delegation from Arava came and visited our facilities and our faculty and our students, we flew off to Israel to see what the Arava is all about. And I can tell you that I can tell you that I have never, ever, and I've been around forever, as you can see from my face, I have never been to a place that inspired me more than the operation going on in Arava. I keep joking with my colleagues that they've figured out a way of growing food on rocks with salty water. And that's a little, poetic license, but they're not far from that. They're, the capacity to grow food in the Negev with a little water that exists. Remember that that's the area where you have the Dead Sea, okay? That tells you, I think, a whole lot. The fact that they can do that through, again, precision agriculture, which are the kinds of things that you can actually grow with the kinds of water that you have there. How do you use the least amount of water? All of those are the questions that everybody's asking around the world. But in addition to that, what they've been able to do in Arava is they've been able to move beyond the technical, the agronomy and the water and the energy, to the social. And they have this school that you're going to hear about next week, in which they bring students from Africa, mostly from Kenya, and they're going to try to educate these folks so that they can go back and deal with the issues that they have in their countries in agronomy, and making their place be able to grow food in a sustainable way. That is hugely important, because a lot of the issues that happen in Africa, in the native regions of the US, the Navajo regions and so on, they're governance issues. They're issues that are social issues. We have a whole lot of technology that we can give people, but without surpassing the energy, the social issues that impede progress in these places, all this technology ends up being a white elephant. So we were not only impressed with what they're doing with their technology, we were hugely impressed with what they're doing with their social work, okay? And we came back and I just said, holy smokes, we need to make this thing work. And then Tali, with her miraculous smile and personality, somehow was able to raise a ton of money so that we could breathe life into this institute. And the purpose of the institute right now is twofold. And it's actually quite beautiful because it addresses all kinds of issues that have to do all the way from how do you actually make sure you're not wasting the money that is given to you, that it's going to be impactful? How do you actually make sure that the projects that you endeavor in creating are the best projects for the time, and with a dream for the future as well? So we've been doing all of that. It's taken about 2 years, but we've now started, and we would have started a project already in Kenya, but COVID got in the way and nobody can travel. So the social aspect of the Institute, people are working in a more theoretical way at the moment. But the other part, which I'm very excited about, is technology that was invented here by a faculty member in Biosphere II, and it's called agrivoltaics. And just to give you a view, I mean, when you drive around now in most places in the US, you go to the temple, and usually the parking lot has solar panels giving you shade. Well, you can do the same thing with agriculture. You can shade the plants, and if you can shade them with solar panels, that's even better. And by doing that, you have the perfect triangle that I was discussing, the triangle of energy, you're producing energy, water, because you're going to use less water if the plants are in the shade, and agriculture. You can grow stuff that if it was in the blasting sun would not work. So all of you that have taken biology will say, well, you know, we need sun for plants to grow. Well, it ends up being that most plants, and if you've lived in the desert, you recognize that even most cacti grow underneath trees when they're small to protect themselves from the blasting sun. And the amount of sun that's required to make plants grow in a place like Aggraval and southern Arizona is probably from 6 in the morning till 10 in the morning. And the rest of it, they don't need that sun anymore. All that sun is doing is stressing the plants out, drying out the soil, and making sure that we're going to have to use more water to make those plants survive. So by having and it's not, again, it's sort of like the drip system. It's not just as simple as saying, oh, let's put these plants in the shade. You basically have to do a fair amount of research to see what plants do well in the shade, and what plants are going to be those plants that are useful for eating, and what are those plants that have economic value. So like tomatoes. Tomatoes, you know, you can export. You don't need to eat all the tomatoes at home. But if you were in Africa and you grew tomatoes, you'd probably throw them all away because there is no market for the tomatoes. And what they need to do is they need to grow food that they can eat. So there's a fair amount of agronomy that goes on in understanding what can be grown underneath shade. How can you expand the season? What kinds of other plants can you grow that you wouldn't be able to grow if it was just in the sun? And the other thing that's been shown is that by having this in the shade, the humidity in the soil remains high for longer times, so that you don't have to water the system as much as you would if the system was in the sun. And finally, and for those of you that are aficionados of solar energy, the silicon-based solar panels, which are most of them, they become way more inefficient as they heat up. So in desert areas, you can lose about 15% of their efficiency because they get hot, and you can't do anything about that. But if you actually have some system that is cooling them off, and plants can do that because plants breathe, and when they breathe, they evapotranspirate water, and you can change the temperature of these systems significant. So you can actually create more electricity. So we've created the system, I call it volume 1.0 to follow, you know, the beta, the computer sciences technology kind of thing. And we've sent the technology to Aggraval, where we expect that with their smarts, they're going to create system 2.0. And system 2.0 will mean, what do we do with the electricity that is being created on the roof of these things? And just using that electricity for lighting is a waste because there are many ways of lighting light bulbs. But perhaps we can find a way that this energy will be sufficient to clean up water in the region for the growing of the plants. And you don't have to desalinize only the ocean. You could desalinize deep well water, which is too saline, but not as saline as the ocean, so that it can actually work with plants. We're also thinking of growing certain kinds of plants that are called halophytes, which can grow in marshes, in saltier water. And these halophytes have the capacity of producing a fair amount of protein. So again, for the nutrition of the world that's going to have less water. And finally, so we now have electricity that can run the system. We have a shaded area that can allow us to grow different kind of food, and therefore use less water in the process. We've already hired postdocs and PhD students. One of them is in Israel, one of them is here. When COVID allows, they will swap places and they'll come here and there. And this is just the beginning of what has to be, in my point of view, the most exciting partnership I've done in my career as a faculty member at the University of Arizona. And I thank Tali for that, because she's been a force. And I thank the JNF, and I hope that many of you will get excited about what a few of the things that I had to say. And if you want to get involved in this institute, we're going to need a lot of women power to keep it going and to reach the potential that it should reach. Thank you very much.
We want to now open it up to questions. So you can either unmute yourself or enter any questions into the chat box. Well, I can kick it off because I have a list of questions. So you were touching on kind of at the end there, the challenge of deciding what food you can and can't grow based off of what the people in the area consume already, that introducing foreign foods isn't really the sustainable option. How do you balance that social element or those social challenges with this cross multicultural, multi-country research? How are you making those decisions?
Yeah, so clearly what we've created is, as I said somewhere in the middle of my talk, we've created the technology, which will go in some box and be sent somewhere. We need the social scientists to actually help us with that. And I wish I was smart enough to be a social scientist, but I'm not. And it's the governance, and it's the economics, and it's the culture, and it's all of that. And it's actually quite complicated. So Alikara, I guess that's the name of the school. I mean, that's one of the, in the Arava that is working with the students from Kenya. That's one of the things that they hope that they can achieve. And I can tell you, there's one of the folks that went from the University of Arizona to Arava in this that I said we took. His name is Tim Feinen, and he is an applied anthropologist who's worked for the World Bank and Food Bank and all these banks. And he's been in Africa half of his life, and he came back and just said that he'd never actually seen a program that was as effective, in his view, as what's been created in Arava. And he got all fired up about it. And this guy is a crusty old guy now that is not easy to get to excite because he's seen too much bad stuff. But he's all fired up. And he's fired up for also to import the official programs to Arizona, so we can use it in northern Mexico and in the Navajo region, where we have the same kinds of issues, for sure.
I want to add to that. Thank you so much, Joaquin. Tim, the professor that came to the Arava, beyond the fact that he was moved by what he saw in the Arava, he said, in the classrooms of the Kenyan students and Vietnam and you name it, and Nigeria, he could not believe what he saw. He said, for 30 years, I've been working with the University of Arizona, trying to do what you've done over here in the Arava. And I'm reminding all of you, this is also due to the huge support that the JNF is giving ACAT, and we've just completed the new building to double the students that they are bringing from abroad. But I want to give credit to this delegation from the University of Arizona that was headed by Dr. Ruiz, and Tim was one of them, that they brought to the table the knowledge of the academic institute. And they said, what we're trying to do with the Joint Institute is really to, to grow the Arava with the knowledge and the research and more people and more students and more professors and so on, but to also help other countries such as Kenya. And when Tim came to the table, he said, guys, you can teach, people from Kenya from today until the end of the world how to grow cucumbers. But if they don't eat cucumbers and they don't like cucumbers and they don't know cucumbers, there's no need for the research in the Arava to teach them how to grow cucumbers. So that when the anthropology and sociology and science and agriculture and water and everything comes together, because you have to think, and that's why we're running applied research and not just research for the sake of research. That's why we intend, you know, to coordinate it with the country, with the other countries, so that they'll benefit from it. And that's thanks to the delegation from the University of Arizona. So thank you again. There was a question about the panel.
I think.
Joaquin, do you have the presentation of Greg with the, there was a question?
No, I don't.
No, if you can.
But you know, I can share it. I can send it to everybody. I avoid PowerPoint presentations as much as I can because I've come to the conclusion that they get in the way of a good story. so anyway, but just imagine. I mean, it's not as just imagine when you go and park underneath one of these parking lots that has a solar panel. It's no different than that, except the height. But all the research underneath it is actually quite interesting because we're measuring humidity and we're measuring two of the things that in Arizona, where we're just beginning to do some of this research on the plants. What's that green that you use for pesto? It's who can remind me?
Basil.
What is it?
Basil.
Basil. Thank you. Because the basil is in the shade. We started with basil, which had, you know, the size of the leaf that you typically buy in the store, and we're growing basil with leaves that are the size of our hands, because the plants respond to being in the shade is to growing bigger leaves. So anything that's leafy is going to just boom. There's a chili that is a delicacy in northern Mexico and in southern Arizona called chiltepín, and it looks like it's just like a little. It looks like a thing of pepper, you know, just round little thing before you grind it, and they are delicious and they are really expensive. And we've been able to show that if you grow them in the shade underneath one of these things, you double the production than you would if they're grown in the fields. So the agrivoltaics, if you want to think about it in a very simplistic kind of way, and it's a good one, it's something that goes in between growing stuff in the field and growing stuff in a greenhouse. And it's not as expensive as growing as making a greenhouse, and it's not as intensive use of water as if you have it in the fields. So it's right in the middle. And because it's cheaper than building greenhouses, and because you don't have to keep, I mean, the thing about a greenhouse is that it doesn't matter how cheap it is, you still have to upkeep it. And that has a cost. This thing, after you put them up there, they're indestructible. So the cost of keeping agrivoltaics going is almost zero. But I'd be happy to send Sarah or somebody. We have a formal presentation that includes everything that I've just said, with graphs and pictures, and you folks can use it as you wish, of course.
Any other questions before I keep asking mine? So I can ask another one. So in the documentary Sustainable Nation that I know everyone here received the link of, some have watched already, some haven't. I remember there was a guy from South Africa in the documentary who had moved to Israel and was working there. And it kind of sparked an article I had read that talked about South Africa declining Israel's help as far as water. Can you talk a little bit about how Israel has worked with countries that don't necessarily recognize it diplomatically speaking, but how the water and agriculture have been a bridge to collaboration?
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. The name of the guy is Dr. Clave Lipschin, and he works for the Aggraval Institute. And Aggraval Institute is one of the entities in the Aggraval that we are working with. And by the way, Dr. Lipschin just posted on Facebook today, this morning, that he's running a research on the existence of COVID-19 in the wastewater in Bedouin communities. This is a research that again is being sponsored by the Jewish National Fund, and that will help not only the Israel and the Bedouin communities to examine and to know, where to work or where to emphasize, but also the Navajo, Joaquin. He's in very good connection, as you know, with the vice president of the Navajo community nation, and Clive is working with them. So yes, water is a bridge between countries and also agriculture. And that's why even ACAT, and I'm sorry, going back to ACAT again, is hosting students from countries that Israel does not have diplomatic relations with. From Muslim countries such as in Indonesia and others, that Israel does not have diplomatic relations. And they come and they study and they become the best ambassadors of the state of Israel. Regardless, Israel has been helping Iran before the Shah, but even now, recently, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the Iranian people and told them that if they need the help of the state of Israel in teaching them how to save water and how to use water efficiently, we're always there for them. Israel is working closely with the United States. Israel is working closely with countries in Africa. I'm sure the Emirates will be one of the countries that will enjoy more even and now the support of Israel. But and Israel is running every other year a special conference that is called WATEC, Water Technology, WATEC, to which people from all over the world are invited to explore and to examine, systems and methods and technologies that are efficient in their countries. So listen, guys, the beauty, not because I'm Israeli, the beauty of Israel is that our education and our desire and our way of thinking is always, I'm telling you, as someone who grew up in Israel and still has kids in Israel and family in Israel, Israel is my home. We always want to help the rest of the world. Whether, when Lebanon had the crash two months ago, a month ago, when they had the explosion over there, the municipality of Tel Aviv, the mayor of Tel Aviv, Ron Huldai, put the flag of Lebanon. That Lebanon is considered an enemy in Israel. He put a huge flag of Lebanon on the municipality building, the city hall of Tel Aviv, in the center of Israel, calling them, if they need our support, we're gonna be there. The same is, with fires, and the same is with water, and the same is with agriculture. We will give the world everything that it needs because Israel is facing, towards peace and good relations with the rest of the world, whether we have good relations or diplomatic relations with them or not. And the water is one of the items that we're doing it. Okay, I hope I gave a full answer, Stephanie.
Amazing, thank you.
How can the average consumer have an impact? Wait, I'm reading another question for us by Jason. If the majority of water used is agriculture, how can we as average consumers have an impact in making sustainable choices in moving the US to be more water smart? Joaquin, do you want to answer?
I can partially answer that. One of the things you can do as a consumer, and I hate to say this because I love meat, is not eat any meat. Whenever the United States is one of the exporters of cattle in the world, most of the cattle is actually grown in the Southwest where there's very little water. So every time you export a cow, you're exporting water. Think about it that way. And the amount of food that is required to keep cattle going is enormous. If you ever have a chance of driving by a dairy farm, the amount of farming that is done to keep the cows going is extraordinary. So yeah, you can actually get food. I mean, if you like tomatoes and things, if they're grown in greenhouses, they're probably going to be more sustainable. If you live in a city that that has farms, those farms that that are in the corners and whatnot, those are typically places that use less water. So as an individual, you can do that. But the U.S., unlike Israel, the laws of water here are very bad and very complicated. And a lot of people, and if you want to see it in a movie, there's an old movie that I recommend to everybody called Chinatown. And it has to do with water wars in Los Angeles in the 50s, I think it was. But lots and lots of people just basically sell their land, not because of water rights. Water rights are a big deal, and they're worth a lot of money. And because here the water belongs to the individual that owns the land, it can't have the same efficiencies that Israel has had with the use of its water. So, so yeah, I would say that try to look for things that are grown in cities more and more. They're now growing stuff in things that are called vertical farms, which are old buildings that they're basically growing things in them. All those kinds of operations typically use less water than if you're growing lettuce in Yuma. So in the winter, just to give you a sense of the magnitude of this stuff, in the winter, I think most of the lettuce that is consumed in the United States, it is most of it, but I don't know if it's 70 or 60. Most of the lettuce that is consumed in the US in the winter comes out of Yuma, Arizona, which must have a rainfall of about 4 inches a year. So it's that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a lot that has to be thought about. And all these farmers, of course, are becoming more and more worried. And this term of precision agriculture, where you use the least amount of water required by the plants, and that all is driven by artificial intelligence, is a booming kind of discipline and field. So if any of you are interested in that, agricultural economics is incredibly interested. So if you're interested in the technology, you can go that way. If you're interested in the economics, you can go that way. Yeah. And I hope also that I was able to answer your question.